sleeping, changes of mood, and all of this should be compared against baseline, right? So if you got a kid who you've raised, since birth all the way through 12 or 13 years old, and then all of a sudden there's a sharp departure from what you know is normal, that's what we want to pay attention to. Not necessarily that there's these episodic things that pop in and out, or that's, the writing is dark, or the artistic work is dark. That's not what we're talking about. If it's a departure from normal, we want to pay attention to that and start having a conversation about it. Then, what do you do? Okay, so this leads into the what I alluded to earlier about plan and access to the plan and scaling. So what I do when we do these screenings, so there's a very formulaic process. The kids write down what some true yes no answers to whether or not they've lost interest or pleasure in the last 4 weeks in certain activities, if they don't feel good about themselves, if they have openly thought about suicide. We ask a bunch of questions, and then based on that questionnaire, they get scaled into 3 tiers, low, medium, high, and then they get referred in for a little higher level conversation with somebody like me, who's a licensed clinician. So I'll sit down and I'll start talking to them a little bit. But at some point, the topic of suicide comes up, and I say, you think about killing yourself. And you don't want to dance around the topic. You don't ever want to say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because somebody who's really committed to suicide, they're going to go, no, I'm not thinking about hurting myself, because in the back of their mind, they're thinking about dying. So you don't want to mislead with something that slides underneath the intended topic by saying, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because they may not be. They may actually think about completing the act. So we want to directly ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? And if they say, well, yeah, it's crossed my mind sometimes, now we want to scale it. And the scale that I use for anything that I scale has got to be extreme. So 1 on the low end of the scale is life is absolutely perfect. I wouldn't change anything. It's amazing. 0 thinking about death. 10, and I put on this scale, my 10 is, as soon as we're done talking, you're gonna leave this office and walk straight into traffic, and try to die. So I ask them, where are you on that scale? How extreme is it? And for me, it depends on who I'm talking to and what their context are and what their circumstances are. Because some people are chronically at a 5 or a 6, and I don't want to be alarmed just because somebody says, well, I'm at a 6. Well, how was yesterday? Well, 6. How about tomorrow? Probably still a 6. Well, what's this about? My life's a wreck. My family's, scattered. Dad's in prison. Mom's on drugs. I'm in foster care. Like, I'm always thinking about dying. Okay, fair enough. But if somebody says, well, I'm in an 8 today. Well, 8's extreme no matter what. Well, what caused you to be an 8? Well, I had a breakup yesterday. Oh, well, normally what are you? Well, I'm normally about a 1 or a 2. Really? Okay, now we got to start paying attention to this, because it represents a departure from the normal, and we want to get that kid some help, or that adult if it's an adult. But we're talking mostly about teenagers and kids here, although the same concepts apply. So now I've scaled, and what I've done is I've assessed for intent, commitment to dying. And if they're at an 8, that's pretty good. That means I mean, not good. That's pretty strong, is what I meant to say. That's pretty strong, and it means that given a certain event, they may push them all the way up to 10. So the next thing I'm going to ask for is, do you have a plan? So you're at an 8. That's pretty strong. It means that if the wind blows the right way, you might be pushed into actually following through. Well, what's your plan for doing this? Now, if the person says something like, well, my dad's got a gun, it's never locked up, it's just sitting on the top of the cabinet at home, and it's always loaded, or I know where the ammunition is, or I'm going to use that gun, I'm going to walk into the desert, and I'm going to end my life. Okay, that's pretty serious, because firearms are the most lethal means of suicide that we have. Similarly, if somebody was equally articulate about a plan for anything else, poisoning, hanging, suffocation, I would have to take that seriously. So if they said gun, and that's their plan, but then I ask the follow-up question, well, what's your access to it? Well, in the previous scenario, the person already told me they have access to it. It's on the top of the cabinet. But they say, well, I'd take and I've had this happen before. An 8-year-old tell me, I'm going to take a gun and shoot myself. So, okay, do you have any guns? No. Do you know anybody who has guns? No. Well, what makes you think that you would get a gun and shoot yourself? I don't know. I just heard about it. It sounded like a good idea because I saw it on TV once. All right, so now all of a sudden I've got a kid with high suicidal ideation, an articulated plan, but no access to the plan. Similarly, if somebody who's 12 years old in Lovelock said, Lovelock, by the way, is in central Nevada. It's about 100 miles from Reno. Said, I'm going to go jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, do you have a car? No. Do you know how to drive a car? No. Do you know where the Golden Gate Bridge is? I think it's in San Francisco. Where's San Francisco? In California. How are you going to get there? I don't know. Well, now all of a sudden, it's less likely that they're going to follow through with it. So we can use that in terms of ascertaining safety for the child, but we still have to deal with the notion that the kid wants to die. Now, here's something to keep in the back of your mind while you're talking to somebody who's suicidal. More often than not, and we know this through interviews from lots and lots of people who have attempted and survived, they don't actually want to die. They want the pain to go away. And whatever pain they're suffering is theirs, it's very real, and they own it. And it's so intense that they think that self-death is the only way out. And that's significant. So we want to keep that in the back of our minds, and we want to try, looking for reasons to keep them alive, right? So, ask them, well, what got you up this morning? Why aren't you already dead? And don't worry about putting the idea of suicide in their head. If it's already there, it's a natural human exploration, personally. So you're not ever going to give, quote unquote, give somebody an idea about dying, because it's already in there. It's anybody who comes to me and says, well, I'm a full-grown adult and I've never considered suicide before. I would call you a liar, because we've all had an experience where we wonder what life would be like if we weren't here suddenly. That's an ideation about suicide. It's very normal. It's very natural. We're all curious about death and the afterlife, and so we don't want to take that away from people, and we don't want to invalidate it, and we don't want to call them weird or strange or rude. We don't want to call them bad or evil. We just want to say, yeah, this is a normal part of life, and I want you to stay alive. So please tell me about your intense thoughts of death. So anyway, if you have that conversation, you start to get a little out of your depth, that's probably time to make a phone call to a crisis line. And the national crisis line in the United States is 800-273-8255. It's 273-TALK is the acronym. TALK is 8255. So it's 800-273-TALK. And there's also a crisis text line that you can use, and that number is 741-741. I'd like to move on here to a different topic that I referenced earlier, which is the idea of the emotional wave. So in all this context of suicidal ideation, risks, warning signs, that kind of thing, what I realize is that in working with these kids, a lot of them just have very, very low distress tolerance, and there's no judgment there. I'm just neutrally assessing that they don't know how to tolerate distress very well. So if you go back to December of 2018, when I did a 6-part series on emotional functioning on this show, you'll know that I talk about emotional functioning in terms of a wave. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to every emotional experience, at least neurologically speaking, as it's created by the external environment. So if the fire alarm goes off right now while I'm recording this, my brain will tell me to do something in response to that external stimulus. After the fire alarm is off, or I leave the building, or I make whatever plans I need to make, my brain will return to logic mode from the limbic emotional state that it was in. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end to that. Now, depending on how much we've trained ourselves, and we can train this formally, we can train it informally, we will get through those emotional waves faster or slower. And for folks who don't know how to tolerate emotion, what they do is they sometimes stick in emotion longer than they should, and sometimes they avoid it. They go cognitive, and they go very cerebral, and they stuff it down, and they rationalize things away. And in either one of those is really, really bad, because what ends up happening is a stacking effect of emotion. So as you walk through life, you're going to be hit by environmental stimuli all the time, in addition to your own thoughts that will create emotions in your brain. So if you direct your thoughts to something happy, you will have happy chemicals flowing through your brain. If something happy occurs to you from the external environment, you will also have happy chemicals flowing through your brain. So let's take an average morning. You wake up, and maybe you wake up and you have a headache, and that kind of, you judge that headache as bad, and it puts you in a kind of a crummy mood to start. So if we think about our scale of 1 to 10, 0 being very, very calm and 10 being extremely emotional, whatever that may be, we'll call it anger for our purpose right now. If you wake up at a 0, like we probably should, if we're waking up in the morning, then you're happy, you're calm, right? But if you wake up with a headache, you're already probably at a 1, 1.5, and if you judge it as annoying or bad or inconvenient or something else, because it's something you have to deal with, well, now maybe you're at a 2 or a 2.5. Let's say you get out, you got the headache, you get out of bed, and you stub your toe. Now you're at a 3.5 because you haven't let go of the headache yet. You're still dealing with the residue. You're trying to wrestle through it, so you haven't quite crested the wave of the headache down to the other side to be okay and return to normal functioning, and something else happens. And then that would be the toe stubbing. And then you walk forward and you're jumping up and down and you're dropping F-bombs, maybe, if you're me. And you go into the bathroom and you put toothpaste on your brush and it falls in the sink. And then it's like, that's not a big deal. You can just wash it away, but it's annoying. And because you haven't worked through the headache, the toe stubbing, and now you've just missed your brush with the toothpaste, that's yet another thing that nudges you up the scale because you're continuing to carry in the residue of the previous experiences. So let's say this morning goes on. There's lots of things that happen in the morning, right? Life keeps throwing stimulus at us. Maybe you open the blinds or the drapes and they snag, and that's annoying. And maybe the dog gets underfoot and you trip over it, and that's annoying. And then your kids aren't quite compliant with putting their clothes on, and that's annoying. And so before you know it, you're simmering at like a 7 or a 7.5 as you're going out the door. You burn your toast, you spill the coffee, whatever. If you're like me, you're already anxious. I just made myself anxious going through that routine because I'm imagining in my head, even though I'm sitting in a room that's very calm, there's no stimulus going on, simply inventing that stuff in my head made me ramp up. So I have to calm down. I'm going to take a breath here. Return to the present moment. Okay, that's what we can do every time we experience this and we notice it in ourselves. We can just calm, let it go, direct our attention to the present moment, grab the car keys, get in the car, put the kids in, back out of the driveway, move on, right? I can leave that stuff behind, but only if I notice it. And what I realized in working with these suicidal kids in the Pershing County schools is that they're not aware of it. So you have to be aware of your distress in order to tolerate it, and then you have to tolerate it in order to practice it again later and know that you can get through whatever you're distressed about. Now picture a kid who maybe is raised in a tumultuous environment. There's always chaos. There's, parents are split, or they're incarcerated or whatnot, maybe bounced around from home to home, parents move job to job. This might not even be unhealthy stuff. It might just be turbulence for turbulence sake. I mean, kids growing up in military households are constantly moving around. They're constantly having to make new friends. They're constantly in a state of fluctuation. So learning how to tolerate distress comes from being taught. And if parents themselves don't know how to teach it because parents themselves don't know how to tolerate it, that message isn't going to get passed down. So you're going to have generations of chaos sometimes. So I'm here to introduce you to the idea that emotional wave, that beginning, middle, and end, that the very temporary aspect of things can also apply situationally, not just episodically, meaning episode to episode, as the environmental stimuli come at us, but in almost like seasons as well. So we can go from, when I do the exercise, I teach emotions, I throw pens at people because it stimulates their brain to realize that a marker's flying at them, they blink or they flinch, and then I tell them, hey, look, a few seconds passed and you're back to listening to me, right? You're not still stuck in surprise. And they nod and, smile, and then they toss the marker back. Okay, that's an easy demonstration of an emotional wave. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. The marker flew past, the marker landed, they picked it up, they realized what was going on, and we were done with it. Now, let's presume that it's not a marker. Let's presume that it's a test. So a test can create a lot of emotional distress, but there's a beginning to it when you're told that there's a test coming. There's a middle when you're taking the test. That's at the peak of it, right? You can't control